country I really hope to visit in the future is Serbia. I really love the country's culture, history, ethnic cleansing, and of course, the experience of riding Russian dick. Today, I want to tell you the story of Japan's first contact experience with Europeans, and what became of it. First, however, I gotta talk about some dude for 10 minutes, to the point that you'll wonder what the hell this guy has to do with Portugal's first contact with Japan. And then, at the 10-minute mark, you'll be like, what? It's all connected. Maybe my dad did go out to get cigarettes and is coming back. Anyway, let's have a chat about Fernão Mendes Pinto, the lying bastard. Fernão was a man born in Montemoro Velho in the year of 1509. Maybe. He was born to a family that was on tough times. It is currently debated whether he was from a poor rural family or some sort of noble family who were not doing very well. However, given the fact that records of his family at this time had started popping off almost all over the Portuguese Empire, I do think he was a nobleman. And by his mid to late teens, Fernão was taken to the household of a noble woman to be employed there, and in general to increase the prospects for his own future. His life there, I think he didn't enjoy it, as after 18 months, apparently he fled from the woman's house, and he got hired for a cargo vessel which was bound for Setúbal. He had a longer trip than usual, as this cargo ship he was on apparently got attacked by French pirates. He was let go along with his crew. According to him, however, they were set free butt naked near modern-day Grândola. He then served a number of years in the Order of Santiago in Portugal, living a comfortable life. However, when he was 28 years old, he joined the Portuguese armadas to India, leaving Portugal in 1537, and he would only return in 1558, at around the age of 50. He traveled to India, Siam, Java, China, and so many other places in the Far East, including Japan. For a long time here, it has been believed that Fernão Mendes Pinto was in the expedition that first reached Japan. As a matter of fact, he said so himself. In his book Pilgrimage, he claims to be the first man to arrive in Japan. In 1543, apparently he landed in Japan and also introduced the arquebus to the locals there. However, this isn't true. Actual historians have guessed that by this time he was not in Japan, but instead he was in Burma. Instead, the first Europeans to arrive in Japan were actually by complete accident. So, according to Olaf G. Ridden's Tanegashima book, the first Portuguese to set foot on this island, he doesn't call them by name, but it's likely that it was António Mota and Francisco Zemuto, as other people say that they were the first Europeans to arrive there. Regardless, for simplicity's sake and because it's funny, we'll be calling these Europeans Tuga 1 and Tuga 2, respectively. If you don't know why I'm calling them Tuga, well, then look it up. I'm not here to teach you things. I'm here to make gay jokes and rip on Europeans. Tuga 1 and Tuga 2 were on a Chinese boat crewed by other Chinese folks. It's a boat which, by the way, is called a junk. And the storm blew this ship off course and sent them towards the island of Tanegashima. They made the landfall specifically at the Cape of Kadokura in a cove called Jim. I think the cove was called Jim. They were discovered sometime later by the nearby villagers, who were excited to see a junk ship in their shores. The village chief, a man called Nishimura, who happened to understand written Chinese, spoke with one of the crew members on the boat. They did so by writing on the sand. So who are those weird-looking dudes you got with you? They don't look like you people. Oh, they're non-ban merchants. The fucking weirdos they are. Oh, really? Yeah, they eat with their hands, like savages. And they don't even know how to use cups to drink. Oh god, they sound like the worst. Objectively, the worst. You guys are a bunch of nerds. What are they saying? Something about the mitochondria, I think. Nishimura said that he would have to report this event to the local lord of the island. Given the rarity of Chinese junk vessels entering Japanese waters, the never-before-seen event of European traders arriving in Japan. The lord of the island was a man called Tanegashima Tokitaka. He was the 14th lord of the island. Nishimura wrote to Akoji, which was the residence of the lord of Tanegashima, to tell him of this incredible event. After the village chief gave his report, the Lord Tanegashima decided to welcome the Chinese crew and the Portuguese pair with them, also having their vessel be brought to settlement name for repairs rather than let it sit in the cove. The Chinese vessel caused waves in the town, and everyone flocked to see it in harbor. Twice was the attraction were the Portuguese traders, aforementioned Tuga I and Tuga II, Antonio Mata and Francisco Zemuto, as again the local villagers. And anyone in Japan had never seen someone like them before. There was a sort of exotic appeal to these traders, both in this incident and future expeditions to the archipelago. A good example is Japanese paintings. If you look at Japanese paintings from the time depicting Portuguese traders and later Dutch traders, you can see sort of how they exaggerate like traditional European features. And I sort of find these paintings really funny to look at, and also really fascinating, because I mean, when has any European looked like that before? I mean, the French look like that, but whatever. We don't count French people as Europeans on this channel. Still, the Japanese fascination with Europeans is something to take into account going forward. The repairing of the junk would take time, and so our dynamic trader duo was invited to the home of the lords of Tanegashima. I didn't mention this at first, but by the way, imagine the balls you need to have to name yourself after the island you rule, or take your name from the island, god damn. In the lord's home, dear Mr. Tanegashima was made aware that the Portuguese had a weird pointy stick with them, which the traders explained what it was, and the lord became very interested, and after a demonstration, Tanegashima had found something he had wanted for a good while. When the Portuguese arrived, their sort of new exotic appeal was something that undoubtedly this lord shared with the villagers and peasants. They were fun curiosities, sort of like, oh, those guys look funny, I wonder what their deal is. But their pointy stick, it was an arquebus, a rifle. And once Tanegashima realized its insane potential, it did not matter what else we told him about the rifles. Now, let's talk geopolitics. The fun uncle to the crazy annoying uncle who thinks the pyramids were built by aliens. Regular ass politics. You see, the lord of Tanegashima was not only the lord of Tanegashima Island, but was the lord of the Yakushima Island, an island that he had lost to a rival clan not long ago. And when he saw that arquebus, Portuguese traders changed from simply being the fun little curiosities to being people carrying a powerful weapon. A weapon that this lord could use. The young lord apparently paid the Portuguese a pretty large amount of money to have this rifle and be taught how to use it. Legend says that he was the first Japanese man to fire a rifle, ever. Luckily for Tanegashima, he ruled an island which had an abundance of iron, so he could easily produce his own rifles, which were soon given the name of Tepo, which translates to iron cannon. In 1544, the Lord Tanegashima, with a nice collection of rifles, invaded Yakushima Island, his lost domain, and he showed those riptards what for. He reconquered the island in a battle that was chiefly decided by the new Japanese-made rifles, and from this moment on, the nature of war in Japan changed permanently. No longer is it about bows and swords only, but gunpowder. Gunpowder which has permanently changed the face of warfare. Tanegashima's monopoly on rifles would not last long. The Lord of Satsuma would be the next ones to hear and gain access to the rifles, particularly due to a trader that was staying in Tanegashima, who went back to his home in Satsuma. And from there, news of the arquebus and the Japanese variant Teppo spread like wildfire throughout the country. The Portuguese traders who introduced these rifles would return home, but they would in turn spread the knowledge of a new land off the coast of China, and their reports of what they saw and of other people who traveled thereafter would soon lead to the formation of something which is now called the Japan voyage. It was a lucrative annual trip that Portugal would undertake. It was such a boon, in fact, that to undertake this voyage, someone would typically have to have provided a great service to the kingdom or win it at auctions to be appointed as the captain of the expeditionary fleet. Or for real, imagine that there's a fucking wait list to go on a month-long dangerous voyage because the reward is suddenly you're a trillionaire. These journeys were undertaken by several naus, which in Japan became known as the Black Ships. Portugal's relation with Japan was honestly not very common with other territories we interacted with, like say India, Brazil or Africa, as we never really established any foothold in the country. Portugal and Japan, in fact, at least from my understanding, seems to have acted mostly as merchants. We went to Japan to sell things, and we also acted as a middleman for trade with China and Japan, as the country did have an embargo on specifically Chinese traders. The Japan voyage was the wrong one that we actively tried to make easier, and in fact, we did. In Canton, Portuguese diplomats managed to get their traders into the region, and in the year 1557, Macau was formally ceded to Portugal, granting us a port in the South China Sea. And in 1570, the city of Nagasaki was founded by Portuguese after an agreement with the local lord. This port would be used by Japan for centuries as the only place Europeans could trade in. However, after nearly a century of trading with Portugal and now the Dutch, the Japanese government saw fit to shut down the entire country from the outside world. I guess they could see the pandemic coming from a mile away. But beyond that reason, why? Why did they shut down the country? It was religion. Well, sorta. As Portugal and Europe's economic ties with Japan grew, so did Japan's vulnerability to those weirdo freaky-deaky Jesuit priests. Some of them would come into the country, and a sizable minority of converts would form in the island of Kyushu. However, it was still a minority of the population, not only of Japan, but of the island itself that they were in. There were other reasons as to why the country closed, and they're honestly far simpler than the European-focused narrative. You see, at the point that the country shut down, the Tokugawa clan ruled as the shogunate, and they simply wanted to centralize power completely, and they saw European presence as an indirect threat to their power. Daimyos could chat up some sexy Europeans with a six-pack, and potentially kick out the Tokugawa clan from the fancy pants big boy chair. So, by shutting down the country and severely limiting trade, Tokugawa accomplished two things. They seized power completely, and they got total control over the country's foreign policy. meaning only the country's actual head honcho could speak to foreign powers. And they also severely limited the power of the many powerful lords who would seek to challenge the Tokugawa rule. Catholicism was also seen as a threat by the Tokugawa clan, mainly by association with the behavior of Japanese monks and priests during the time we're talking about in Japan, as their own monks would often arm themselves in rebellion against the government. So they expected anyone who followed the Catholic faith to be capable of the exact same act. In fact, when Portuguese colonial rivals, the Dutch, came over, they did their best to exploit this fear, highlighting, for example, the black legend that they had developed around this Spanish, who also popped up in Japan, regarding their behavior in the New World in their treatment of the Aztec population, and also our own behavior of assimilating native Brazilians. So by association, Japanese would start to think that we would try and assimilate them. And as a matter of fact, the Japanese saw the Dutch and the English different from us Iberians in one notable way. They were capable of separating trade from religion. The country closed, and due to the Dutch being faithless heathens, they were allowed to keep trading with the Japanese in the port of Nagasaki. Japan itself would enter into a period of extensive isolation and of extreme hostility to anyone who threatened it and the balance of power that the Tokugawa clan formed. Catholicism as a religion was brutally suppressed, so much so that to this day only 1% of the population there is Catholic. It is the lowest percentage in the entirety of Asia. Heretics. It was to the point that the Portuguese in the country were actively killed, and anyone else who was not a Dutchman in Nagasaki was banished. This banishment would escalate into execution in 1825 at the command of the shogunate. After 200 years, however, Japan's isolation came to an abrupt end at the hands of everyone's favorite petroleum liberator, the United States, and also the Western powers. Seeing the gates open up in Japan, they tried to impose on Japan the same unequal treaties that they did on China, with far more limited success. And in the span of just a few years, Japan went from an underdeveloped country with zero influence on the world stage to a great power, threatening the influence of older and more experienced one. This has been a fascinating story, and in fact this sort of strange sudden rise to power is something that I find quite interesting about Japan. They were able to replicate the arquebus with less quality, but just as effective as the original. And then, despite spending nearly 2 centuries in splendid isolation, Japan was able to adapt insanely fast in some 50 years, to the point that they won a war against 2 great powers. More so, an aspect I won't delve much to on here, but I think the Western fascination with Japanese culture has been around for a much longer time than we think so. For example, Fernão, who clearly lied about visiting Tanegashima and introducing firearms. In fact, I think he just wanted the credit and to let his kids boast about that fact. I mean, I can't prove this theory with anything. I am off my medication, yes, thanks for asking, and yes, I did listen to the voices. You got so many great questions today. So yeah, I wonder if they had body pillows with drawings of Japanese women back in the day too. But don't worry, they're actually 1,000 years old, they just look underage, it's fine. In the end, Portugal and Spain got kicked out of Japan for what I would say is much the same reason why the Iberian Peninsula sort of lost the power that it had at the beginning of the colonial era. And it's because we were too stuck in our religion. Everywhere we went, we talked about Jesus like we were some sort of out-of-touch youth pastor. And then on came the Dutch and English, who knew exactly what not to talk about when making colonies and money. Thanks for watching.